He was used to living in a world of verifiable quantities. His calendar kept everything in its lane. Work calls, deadlines, workouts, family dinners, like gears in a machine he had been assembling for years. That was why he loved checkups. Systematic exams turned the unknown into a spreadsheet, and risk into a parameter he could control. Then, on one of those calm, almost routine July days, a word appeared on the screen that fit no cell at all: Lyme disease. No symptoms, no dramatic overture, just a single line in a report, heavy enough to thicken the air in the room. He read the conclusion twice, then a third time, as if repetition could alter the wording. The doctor spoke evenly, professionally. Yes, a positive result. Yes, therapy is indicated. Yes, the outlook is good with timely treatment. But behind the dryness trailed a procession of unspoken what-ifs, questions that do not bargain. He nodded, took the printout, thanked the staff the way one thanks for meticulous work, and stepped into the corridor, the kind where everyone pretends their life has not changed in the last 5 minutes. He had always kept his emotions to himself, not out of shyness, but on principle. Feelings are useful only when they help you decide. Everything else is noise. And yet noise met him at the door, a world where any private yes becomes someone else's "oh God." In that world, diagnoses earn headlines before a patient finds the words for family. He posted a brief, thoroughly unheroic note: diagnosis confirmed, no symptoms, treatment planned. No exclamation marks, as befits someone who dislikes embellishment. Still, even within that composure, a low hum could be heard, like distant thunder that hasn't arrived yet but has already changed the light. At home, he opened the notebook where his plans lived and understood. Every line would now make sense only in tandem with a new schedule: therapy protocols, follow-up labs, appointment dates. He penciled them in between work tasks as if this were just another project. Breathing got easier. And yet, in the quiet spaces, between the lines where nothing is written, old memories surfaced. Down there, the same pain still lived: losing his mother. Her diagnosis had once struck like lightning, absolute and cruel. His arrived as a whisper, but whispers change destinies too, if you ignore them. He called the people who should hear first. He spoke calmly, assuredly, with a professional tenderness that builds trust. He didn't want loved ones learning medical terms from the internet. He explained, early detection, not a reason to panic, but a reason to act. The same rationality sounded in his voice, the kind that makes victories look like consequences, not miracles. Rationality is armor. It lets you move forward. But armor smells like metal, and that scent recalls a war even on the most peaceful day. That night he couldn't sleep, not from fear of symptoms, there were none, but from uncertainty. Uncertainty is trickier than pain. Pain demands an immediate response, while uncertainty forces you to live suspended and not break into an inward scream. He made himself reach for the familiar: method, routine, discipline. He drafted questions for the doctor, marked articles to read only from vetted sources, set timelines and reserve windows in the calendar. Rituals are the best therapy for the human mind when the body suddenly asserts its rights. In the morning, everything looked as it had yesterday: children laughing, an inbox filling up, the city moving at its usual pace. But at the center of that everyday whirl, a new, barely visible pendulum had begun to swing. The word Lyme. He wasn't going to turn his life into a series, but he understood the plot was already written. And if he had to play the lead in this story, it would be neither victim nor spectator. It would be the role of a man who puts the diagnosis where it belongs, on the task list, beside the items that truly shape the future. Because in his world, even a quiet threat deserves a loud answer, precise, timely, and without hysteria. He had already started writing that answer: ordeal and choice. Every story has a breaking point, A moment when familiar logic is no longer enough and a step is required that cannot be delegated. For him, that moment came with a finding not directly tied to Lyme, yet capable of crossing out the future far more brutally: thyroid nodules. The kind of words doctors assemble into spare phrases: growth, atypia, high probability of malignant transformation. Not a slap to the face, more like a cold finger of ice tracing the spine. Not a shout, but an ultimatum delivered in a whisper. He studied the biopsy pages, the ultrasound printouts, where an entire fate fits into centimeters and shadows. The physician explained the way one speaks to grown-ups: the percentage of risk, the possible outcomes of watchful waiting, let's wait and see, and the alternative: a preventative operation, a hemithyroidectomy. Half the organ, the price of refusing to open a door behind illness might be standing with no return ticket. There was nothing heroic in the proposal. There was a decision. Simple arithmetic in the ledger of responsibility to himself and to those who come running to him, each morning with news that matters more than any diagnosis. I drew this. I did it. Dad, look. The night before the decision was quiet and heavy. He walked the house like a ship in dead calm, where nothing moves except thought. He listened to the silence until the essential became audible. Fear does not deserve a vote, but it does deserve to be heard. He didn't bargain with it, didn't dramatize it. He acknowledged it. Yes, this is frightening. And then, as always, he converted fear into tasks. Lists, calls, second and third opinions, careful questions in a notebook. How will my voice change? What regimen after? Which markers do we track? Not a single empty line, only facts, because emptiness is pastureland for panic. The operating room was bright. Light is the enemy of fantasy. It burns off the excess. People in masks spoke briefly, confidently, the way those speak who know how to return control to the place where chance recently ruled. He signed the consent the way one signs an important contract, understanding every letter. In that suspended moment when the world shrinks to a white ceiling and the steady rhythm of a monitor, a person is always alone with himself. He didn't search for lofty words. He searched for a simple thought to hold on to, and he found it. I am not doing this for peace of mind. I am doing it for the future. The future rarely looks like a brass band victory. More often, it looks like a suture that heals correctly. Waking brought no revelations. It brought pain, honest and bearable, fatigue with a sterile smell, and the first report his entire body had been waiting to hear. Everything went according to plan. The risk threshold had been cut away along with half the gland. Ahead lay carefulness, time for the voice, a pause for exertion, a muzzle for pride. He would have loved to vault back into his usual pace, but maturity is when you remain lying down because you must, not because you can. Outside, the world was already naming what had happened. Some wanted tragedy, others a motivational speech. He chose a third thing, not because it is dull, but because it is reliable. Ahead lay adaptation, hormone panels, a calendar of follow-up exams. Quietly, he rebuilt daily life the way he had once rebuilt companies, with metrics, deadlines, and feedback. He understood that discipline is not shackles, but a bridge, one he would use to lead himself from after to what comes next. And yet every bridge has a midpoint, the place where the wind is stronger and the rails feel colder. That is where the crucial part occurs, not outwardly, but within. He looked into that transparent void and for the first time in a long while, allowed himself to admit. Vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. It is its source. From that admission, a new code emerged. Do not postpone. Do not try on other people's versions of your story. Do not over-explain to those who feed on rumor. Act, verify, guard, return, and one day, look back, not for applause, but to be sure this turn was the right one. Family resonance and outside interpretations. The noise didn't start with him, it started with reflections. He spoke a few carefully measured lines, and the echo answered in other people's voices, swelling like a wave in a narrow strait where every wall multiplies the roar. Headlines appeared quickly, prematurely certain about emotions he had not shown. Husband in tears, heartbreaking diagnosis, family on the edge. Convenient formulas for a world that craves sharp edges. His cadence wasn't in them, yet they clung to the facts like luggage tags and sped through feeds faster than anyone could explain the difference between pain and discipline. Almost simultaneously, another point flared in the public picture, the news of a benign cyst in his wife's neck. A simple story, and by medical standards, a fortunate one. Found in time, removed with care, recovery on schedule. But in the clickbait economy, a good outcome is a poor product. What they prefer is a streak of bad luck, stitching two unrelated events into a single plot about a family under gathering clouds. Rumors, as always, asked no permission. Some whispered about too many coincidences. Some assigned mystical symmetry to diagnoses. Others took silence as proof of a secret. And the quieter he spoke, the louder others shouted on his behalf. On days like those, a home stops being a place to hide and turns into a stage where strangers try to peek behind the curtain. He watched the long lenses of public attention turn private decisions into public referendums. Was he right to? Is she hiding? He didn't answer. He preferred to answer doctors and family, the ones who needed the truth, not a version. But in online culture, silence looks like a blank space in a puzzle. People start coloring it in however they can. That is how suppositions grow, how talk of swan songs and marriage tests take root, and how easily we forget that real people have a right to privacy even when they're not pretending to be invisible. To be fair, there were other notes beneath the din. People wrote about their own journeys. Some recognized themselves in his steady tone, those who had been through biopsies and protocols. Others remembered coming late to screening and now teach their children to arrive early. This quiet banner of support didn't draw the eye, but it was worth more than clicks. He read selectively, like a man greedy for time, whose minutes are all penciled in. He read and set aside the letters where usefulness, not volume, was the point. Usefulness, however, must not be confused with naivety. He knew that any resonance is a currency. Some buy influence with it, others hope, still others purchase alibis for their own anxiety. To avoid getting caught in someone's finely woven net, he needed to anchor himself in his own reality. His reality was simple. There is a treatment plan. There is a timeline for recovery. There are children who need to see their father, not in a video with a quiver in his voice, but at the table, alive, a little tired, but composed. There is a wife for whom other people's diagnoses aren't material for dramaturgy, but one more reason to hold fast together. The paradox of modern life is that the closer you bring a story to fortified optimism, the more insistently the audience searches it for cracks. It is drawn to the edge, where it's louder. And yet, he had a rare, precise chance to redirect the resonance, to make loud the words that rarely earn applause. Screening, second opinion, action plan. Rumors find little room on that field. They don't withstand the light of facts and the regularity of follow-up. So he left the mob only what he could spare, its own energy, and kept for himself what headlines can't sell, the right to determine the tempo and key of his story. Deep inside, beyond the reach of any lens, lived a subtler fear, not for himself, for them. For those who look to him like a post to tie a rope around so the wind won't carry them off. You cannot monetize that fear, you can only acknowledge it. And acknowledgement brought clarity. You can't control other people's interpretations, but you can control your example. Example means you don't answer gossip with a blow, you answer with a schedule. Labs, on this date. Consult, on that date. Recovery, per plan. With each item completed, the chorus quieted, because even the loudest whisper is powerless where every step is stamped with a date and a signature. The fine line between fear and control. Treatment is not an event. It's a corridor, long, level, windowless. Every few steps, a door labeled monitoring, labs, dosage adjustment, follow-up. He entered that corridor without theatrics, the way one walks into an office at dawn when the light is still cold and the keyboards are silent. But silence heals worse than clarity, so he turned the route into a checklist. Medications, per protocol, water, on schedule, sleep, by the clock, consults at fixed intervals, repeat tests, not when it works out, but on this date at this time. He knew discipline doesn't speed up time, but it keeps time from sliding out from under your feet. Lyme is a cunning opponent. In some bodies, it passes almost unnoticed. In others, it leaves traces like faint scratches on glass, visible only in a certain light. He kept both possibilities in mind without romanticizing either. His strength lay in refusing the guessing game. He didn't listen for "I think I feel," didn't hunt for mythical signals. He relied on the calendar and on physicians who can say, "So far, all is on track," not as a soothing mantra, but as the outcome of concrete measurements. Any rumor, any thread of panic tugging from the web tore on this mesh of facts like on an invisible filter. And yet, fear is not about facts. Fear is about the gaps between them. At night, the gaps widen. Even the most disciplined plan feels fragile, like a glass bridge over a gorge. He admitted it plainly to himself. Control is an instrument, not an amulet. And like any instrument, it is not omnipotent. So he did what he does better than most. He converted fear into tasks. If the bridge is fragile, reinforce the supports. If the gaps are wide, shorten the stride. He trimmed his information flow down to medical sources, stopped reading comments, and stopped explaining his silence. Silence became part of therapy. In it, one breathes deeper and hears the heartbeat that says, "You are alive." There was another subtler front, the body. After surgery, it doesn't speak in slogans, but in hints. Fatigue arriving early, a new timbre in the voice, a guardedness in movement like a person carrying a glass filled to the brim. He didn't argue with these signs. In his younger years, he might have tried to power through, to return to pace and prove he couldn't be broken. Now he understood, maturity is not acceleration, it's the choice of speed. He chose slow strength, the kind built on sequence, morning after morning, step by step. Sometimes, midday, a strange feeling came over him, as if he were in a conference room with himself. On one side of the table sat the rational strategist. On the other, the man who remembers how a diagnosis once scorched an entire era of his life. The strategist laid out graphs, risks, probabilities. The man placed a photo of them together on the table and asked, "Are you sure you're doing everything possible?" They didn't argue, they aligned. From that alignment, a new order emerged. Respect for the numbers and respect for the mute anxiety that cannot be talked down but can be kept busy. Rumors still tried to seep inside, like a cold draft through a leaky frame.
Too quiet means they're hiding something. Too calm means they're not telling all. He responded the way a person responds whose every hour has a purpose, with nothing. In this war, silence is not capitulation, it is strategy. Because any comment becomes fuel, and any empty space becomes a storyline. He didn't need a storyline, he needed outcomes. Stable labs, clear recommendations, a return to the normal exchange of days, not to the old normal, but to one that accounts for a new knowledge of his own fragility. And still, every so often, when the house fell asleep, he would step out onto the porch and catch himself in a near-superstitious habit of staring into the dark, as if answers could be seen there. There were no answers, but there was an important detail: the night air, smelling of freedom from other people's voices. In that air, he shaped the essential thought: I am not waging war on illness, I am negotiating with life. The negotiations are tough, with no discounts and strict deadlines. That is precisely why he has a chance to return not as he was, but more finely tuned. So that one day, when the corridor ends and the door opens, he will step not into a chaotic street noise, but into a space where his own footfall is audible, steady, unhurried, and his. The return with a gift. Returns are rarely triumphant. More often, they're a quiet rhythm the body and mind must relearn. Early wake-ups, cautious plans, days without heroics, and evenings without unnecessary promises. He didn't turn it into a victory oration. He simply returned to where likes don't wait, but duties do. Sign this, review that, make it home for dinner, pick up from practice, listen to what went well today. In that simplicity lay what the story had lacked all along: meaning. Because meaning isn't in diagnoses, rumors, or other people's reconstructions of how it was. Meaning is in what continues. A gift doesn't arrive with fanfare. A gift is knowledge that is hard to accept and impossible to forget. He brought it back from places that smell of antiseptic, where time is measured not in seasons, but in intervals between tests. He now knew firsthand what earlier is better tastes like, how everything is on track sounds in the mouth of a person who likes to keep things under control, and how easily that control turns into fiction if you don't acknowledge its limits in time. He returned with a new grammar of responsibility. Prevention is not panic. Silence is not secrecy. And resources aren't only money and connections, but discipline, attention, and the willingness to ask a doctor the same question twice if the first answer leaves an emptiness inside. But a gift is also an obligation to pass it on. He understood. The louder the world discusses tears and heartbreaking words, the quieter the instructions sound, the ones that might save a specific life. So he translated his story into the language that speaks best to people not chasing sensation: dates and checklists. Get screened, don't delay. A second opinion isn't an insult to your doctor, it's your insurance. Write down questions in advance. Measure what can be measured, and don't invent what isn't there yet. He wasn't preaching how to live, he was offering tools. And tools have this virtue: they work even for those unmoved by rhetoric. Naturally, the chorus of interpreters kept murmuring nearby. Some tried to squeeze his path into the temptation, fall, rebirth. But he was no longer a participant in that show. Inside, another stage stood. A kitchen where someone asks, "How are you?" and you can answer, "Tired," without fear of losing face. A doctor's office where silence is a sign of respect, not an accusation. And a hallway at home where at night you can hear your own breathing and no longer feel compelled to check what they're saying. Not because nothing matters, because the hierarchy of what matters is now clearer. He allowed himself the luxury of not hurrying. He returned to work not as before, but as his body, acquainted with a new dose of caution, required. He measured not speed, but stability. He marked his calendar not only with deadlines, but with rest windows, the way an engineer marks load-bearing structures. Sometimes he caught himself feeling a strange lightness that honest boundaries provide. Not today. That no rescued tomorrow better than any yes, I'll try. And still, every story has a tale. One question that keeps the tension from scattering. He didn't speak it aloud, but he addressed it to anyone listening who thought this was about celebrities and their world. When your own feed one day shows the word you fear, what will you choose? Noise or action? He has already answered. His answer is not loud, but it's contagious. A plan, a checkup, discipline, a second opinion, a return. And if the hero's journey has an award, it isn't handed out on a stage. It's given in the morning, when you wake and, for the first time in a long while, feel a simple, almost childlike certainty. Today will be.